Again, this is Ben Xiong with the Fuelcell Partnership. I manage the digital communications. We have Keith Malone, who handles public affairs for the Fuelcell Partnership, Dave Park, who manages the infrastructure development with the Fuelcell Partnership. We also have Jane Berner with the California Energy Commission in the Hydrogen Technology and Planning Unit, as well as Andrew Martinez with the California Air Resources Board, and Chris White, the Communications Director of the California Fuelcell Partnership. So first off, a couple of administrative things. The webinar is currently muted for everyone. However, you are able to use the GoToWebinar tool to ask questions. The webinar recording and the presentation slides will be posted later this week, or sorry, later next week. Later in this presentation, I'll show you exactly where that's going to be presented. And so with that, Keith?
Thank you, Ben. So next slide, please, Ben. So I just want to remind everyone that the California Fuel Cell Partnership is a public-private partnership. This year, we are celebrating 20 years of working together or bringing together a variety of stakeholders to move fuel cell electric vehicles and hydrogen further along the pathway of commercialization. And so I just wanted to put that kind of in everyone's mind as we go through and we respond to questions, as we talk about what's happening. I also want to point out we've, since the last quarterly webinar, we've added a few new members. Most notably at the executive level, we've welcomed Anglo American, a platinum mining company out of South Africa. In addition, by the next webinar, we will also be talking about welcoming Nikola Motor Company out of Arizona, as well as Iwatani Corporation out of Japan. I'm sure as most of you have realized, this is an international launch. The work we do in California is certainly important, and people from all over the world come here to take a look at what we do, but there is a lot of international cooperation that takes place. And it's certainly reflected in the fact that for fuel cell electric vehicles, we use one international standard for fueling mechanism, or as I often like to use a really bad Lord of the Rings reference, one nozzle to rule them all. So with that, can we go to the next slide, please, Ben? And I promise not to use any other lousy humor in the webinar. So many of you probably already know on our website, under the resources section, we have a webpage called By the Numbers. We like to, every month, update them as best we can, especially with regards to the light duty or passenger vehicle market. As you can see, we've surpassed 6,000 light duty vehicles here in the Golden State. I'd also like to put in perspective the fact that while we may have fewer stations than other countries, we actually have more cars on the road than anybody else. So that's something we like to point to with pride. With every quarterly webinar, I conduct a bus census among transit agencies here in California. So the numbers have gone up, buses on the road. We now have 30 fuel cell buses on the road, 22 are in development. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with a slide further on in the webinar. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And as we go through our conversations, obviously this webinar takes a little more focus on the light duty sector. We certainly are focusing even more so now on the bus and the medium duty and heavy duty sector, and recognize kind of the benefit they bring to light duty vehicles. But I wanted to keep some things in perspective. So I've created, I won't call it so much a timeline as a number line. How about that? To kind of really kind of keep us focused on where we want to be, where we want to go here in California. So 100 stations, 200 stations, 1,000 stations. So those 100 stations, our current goal was funded in 2013 by Assembly Bill 8. The next goal that was set was early next year by our last governor, Governor Jerry Brown, 200 stations by 2025. And so stakeholders are working together right now to ensure that we're able to meet that goal. And then, as we've said in previous webinars, we released the California Fuel Cell Revolution, vision document for 2030, and that document calls for 1,000 stations serving upwards of 1 million vehicles in California. So I just kind of wanted to start off just to kind of help you keep that in mind as we go through and talk about all the various activities and initiatives going on. So next slide, please, Ben. So I'm just going to kind of pass through this really quickly, just a chart to kind of keep in perspective where we are with hydrogen station retail development, as well as the ongoing sales of fuel cell electric vehicles. And of course, when we share documents later on with attendees, we will this will be included in there. Next slide, please. So to get to the meat of the webinar, we have a number of stations that will be opening in 2019. We're looking at about 14 stations overall. Listed here are a number of the stations that we expect to be open by mid 2019. We're really excited with the possibility of welcoming Cal State LA. I know they've been working hard to bring themselves up to speed and to reach retail status. I'm sure Ben will chime in with some additional details as well, and I appreciate that. And Ben, actually, I'm going to turn it over to him to talk about the stations that are in maintenance. Ben?
And thanks, Keith. Before I talk about stations and maintenance, just wanted to note that of the stations listed at the top there, any one of those could be the 40th station to open up. We do know that the San Francisco station will likely be the station after the Sacramento station. Also, in the previous webinar, we talked about 3 stations: LAX, Palo Alto, and Emeryville, and it was great to have those 3 stations open up last year at the end of 2018. So that was a great success for the network. So I've had a number of questions online about the Ontario station and why that station has dropped off of our station operational status system, and people have been seeing different icons on our station map. And so we did produce a new process to remove stations from SOS. Essentially, if stations are offline for greater than 30 days and there's no definite resolution or resolution plan provided to us, we've removed it from SOS. Also, if we've been alerted that the station is going to be offline for an extended period of time, then we're removing it from SOS. So in this example, for instance, Ontario, it's been offline for several months. We also know that Newport Beach, Shell has alerted us that it's going to be offline for 3 months, and they've given us the okay to remove that from SOS as well. And so again, I'll show you exactly what that looks like on the site, and also what it looks like on our station map. So with that, again, I'm going to show 3 different tools that we have that will be of pertinence to you. First is our website, the Fuelcell Partnership, CaFCP.org. At the very top right here, you can access our station map. You can also access that same station map from the link here. So again, clicking on that takes you to our station map. The Ontario station, so again, this station has now been moved to not operational, and we show that with this gray dot here. So it's moved from a green to a gray. On the filter, you'll see it as retail, not operational. And if you click on it, it'll give you more information of when it is expected to come back online. And so again, similarly, later this afternoon, we'll do the same process for Newport Beach as well. The second resource that I want you to be aware of is our resources page. So again, this can also be accessed from our homepage using the top menu here. And this page here houses all of our internal documents, all of our reports. Dave is going to talk a little bit about our station location announcement later on. We also have external links. So the joint agency report that Jane is going to report on is also available on this site here as well. So these are links, external links, internal links, and as well as documents. And so really great tool. I encourage you to use it if you're looking for any documents related to fuel cell technology and hydrogen. If there's anything that's not on this page and you're looking for it, please feel free to shoot us an email and we'll add it to this page here. And then the third resource that we have available is our Station Operational Status System, or SOS. So this can be found at m.cafcp.org. It's also on the very bottom footer of our main site. So for anyone who's new to fuel cell vehicles or new to our website, this SOS allows you to check in real time when a station is operational or not. A green circle means that's currently available for use and can give you a full fill. A yellow triangle means that it's currently not able to give you a full fill, but you can still get hydrogen. And then that red square there, that means that the station is not operational. And so if you show up, you won't get any fuel. We also sometimes have stations go or lose connectivity to us. And so if they stopped transmitting data, you'll see a question mark show up in this icon here. In those instances, we sometimes will add a note to that station. And so you'll see here an information icon. And if you click on the station, it'll give you more information. I also want to point out that the Mountain View station, this station has been offline for a couple of weeks, but we're not removing it from the SOS site because it is expected to come back online later next week. So if you click on it, again, it will give you a little bit more information about when it's expected to come back online, or if it's lost power, or any other information. I've also had customers ask me, especially with the supply issues that's been going on in Southern California and Northern California, how do we know how much hydrogen is available, the capacity at that station? If you click on that link, it will take you to this page here, and it will show you the capacity that's available in real time at that station. So again, I just want to note that the Ontario station, so this list currently is listed in alphabetical order. The Ontario station has been removed, but still showing on our station map. We plan to remove the Newport Beach station later this afternoon, but the Mountain View station will still be accessible. Also, something I wanted to note, sorry, just bouncing back real quickly to our station map. We've had customers asking, or not customers, but stakeholders asking about trucks. And so we will be adding trucks to our station map in the near future. You can, currently you can find buses on our station map. And so right below buses, we'll have trucks available as well. We've also had customers asking about other technologies, as well as, why isn't Cal State LA listed on SOS? SOS only shows publicly accessible hydrogen stations in California. And so there are other tools that you can use for finding other technologies, as well as for finding other stations. We have the HyGo app, as well as Honda has their app, Toyota, as well as Hyundai, and they might show a little more detail. They get their same information from our database. But again, for us, for our SOS site, we show only the publicly accessible stations in California. And so again, I encourage you to use the site, log in, create an account, and you can save this onto your smartphone. It's not an app. But again, I did list a couple of apps that you can download if you're interested. You can access the site on any mobile-friendly phone. And you can add this to your home page to quickly access it. But again, sign up for an account so you can get notified via email or text message of any changes to these stations in real time.
Ben, just before you move on, could you step back to the list of stations that are opening next? No, on the slide. You only show 5 stations here, but there are more stations than that opening. Can you briefly explain why you're only showing those 5?
Yes. Yeah, so these are the stations that are opening next in mid-2019 here. So probably, I would say in the next 3 or 4 months here, we expect these stations to open up. Now, if you're looking for other stations that might open around you, again, I would recommend going to this resources page here. We have our hydrogen stations list that you can download. And so clicking on this, it shows you, it gives you a date of when it's estimated to open. We also have what phase it's currently in, as well as notes that's provided from the station developers as well. All right, so with that, I'm going to give give this over to Jane Berner from the California Energy Commission. Jane?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks to the California Fuel Cell Partnership for inviting me to speak today on our joint report. And a little bit later on, I'm going to be joined by Andrew Martinez of the Air Resources Board to provide information on some particular topics. Next slide, please. So the California Energy Commission administers the Alternative and Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program, or ARF-VTP, which the state legislature created in 2007 to advance fuel and vehicle technologies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, supporting the state's climate change policies. In 2013, the legislature passed Assembly Bill 8, which directed that $20 million of the annual ARF-VTP funding allocation support hydrogen refueling station development until there are at least 100 stations in California. So the stations that we've been talking about today have pretty much all received funding from this funding program here. Next slide, please. So Assembly Bill 8 also defined reporting requirements related to hydrogen vehicles and refueling stations for both the California Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission. Today, I'll be discussing the joint report, which is shown on the right, which the Energy Commission and the Air Resources Board write together and release at the end of each year. The joint report's focus is on the time and cost needed to reach 100 hydrogen refueling stations. And the joint report uses and builds on the analysis that the Air Resources Board does in the summer report or the annual evaluation that is shown on the left. And I know these, at least on my screen, the links to these are a little cut off, but as you saw before, these documents are both available on the partnership's website as well as on our own agency websites. And I think the slides will be available later for accessing these reports. Next slide, please. So the joint report provides an update on the status of hydrogen refueling stations at the end of the year. At the end of 2018, there were 39 stations open to the public, and all but one of these received funding from the ARF-VTP. In total, 8 new stations opened in 2018, and there are another 26 stations that are receiving funding from this funding program and that are under development. When all of these stations open, the network will provide roughly 17,000 kilograms per day of hydrogen. And what does this mean? So an average vehicle fill is about 3 kilograms. So this network could fill over 5,000 fuel cell vehicles each day. And when we consider how often people actually refuel their vehicles, we estimate that this network, when it's all built, will support about 24,000 fuel cell electric vehicles. And again, that's just these stations that are shown on this map. And next slide, please. So this figure from the 2018 joint report is an update of a figure presented in the Air Resources Board annual evaluation. I'm not going to go into too much detail on it because it is in the other report in more detail, and there's a lot of more explanation. But in the joint report, we provide an updated number of the fuel cell electric vehicles based on October data from the California Department of Motor Vehicles. So the October 2018 number was 5,014, which is shown by the red dot in the figure that is above 2018. And this was double the number from October 2017. So we're seeing good growth in the number of vehicles in California. We also share the fuel cell electric vehicle sales and lease data that the California Fuel Cell Partnership collects and provides via their website, which has already been mentioned on this call. This is a great resource for finding the latest vehicle numbers. And there were 5,658 FCEVs as of December 1st, 2018. In the annual evaluation, the Air Resources Board prepares estimates of future fuel cell electric vehicle sales based on auto manufacturer survey. And so this figure shows those projections also. The latest estimates are 23,600 FCEVs by 2021 and 47,200 by 2024. You'll remember from the last slide that our currently funded network should support about 24,000 FCEVs. So this aligns with how much fuel we think we will need in 2021. But we must continue to build more stations to allow for vehicle growth far beyond that, and to support the state goal of having 5 million zero-emission vehicles in California by 2030. Next slide, please. The joint report also covers some of the relevant developments related to hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles that happened during the year. In 2018, the Energy Commission announced proposed awards for renewable hydrogen production facilities that will supply fuel to stations. One project is located in Moreno Valley, which is in Riverside County, and the other project will be built in Kings County. There have been announcements of investment in hydrogen production beyond these Energy Commission supported projects that I just wanted to quickly mention. For example, Air Liquide made an announcement towards the end of 2018 that it will be building a hydrogen production facility that will also provide fuel to California to support about 35,000 FCEVs. So there's been a lot of exciting announcements recently on the hydrogen production front. Next slide, please. Another significant development in 2018 was the updated low carbon fuel standard regulation developed by the Air Resources Board. The new regulation, which became effective in January 2019, introduced hydrogen refueling infrastructure credits, or HRI credits. How these credits work and some example analyses are included in the 2018 joint report. And the Air Resources Board website has the full details about this program. To provide a little bit more information, the HRI credits are generated based on the unused refueling capacity of a given station and are generated in parallel with LCFS credits based on the actual quantity of fuel dispensed. So these HRI credits offer the potential of a more consistent and predictable revenue stream for hydrogen refueling station owners. And the hope is this increased certainty on the return on investment of stations will hopefully create a virtuous cycle where private investment increases and the rate of station development accelerates. So this was another one of the big developments in 2018 that we talk about in the joint report. Next slide, please. So the 2018 joint report also presents information based on operational data received from the open hydrogen refueling stations in California, including information like this about actual hydrogen dispensing. This figure presents the amount of fueling actually taking place at stations from 2015, when the first stations opened, through the third quarter of 2018. And in Q3 2018, about 2,500 kilograms were dispensed per day on average. With an average vehicle fill being about 3 kilograms, this means that over 800 fuel cell vehicles are fueling per day in California. About 1,500 kilograms are being dispensed per day in the greater Los Angeles area, which is shown in orange. And this represents LA, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura counties. And about 1,000 kilograms are being dispensed on average per day in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is shown in yellow. Next slide, please. The joint report also presents figures on station utilization, or the percentage of the station capacity that is actually being dispensed. In the third quarter of 2018, stations were on average dispensing about 40% of their capacity. So we see that this utilization rate is growing pretty steadily over time, demonstrating how more stations are needed to support the growing number of fuel cell electric vehicles in California. Next slide, please. This figure is part of the analysis we do in the joint report related to the time it takes to build stations. This figure presents information on station development times from 3 Energy Commission solicitations upon 09608, 12606, and 13607, as you can see from the x-axis. And these are shown in chronological order from left to right. So one takeaway from this figure is that station developers have made significant progress in reducing the amount of time it takes to build stations, from around 4 years from our earliest solicitation to about 2 years in the most recent solicitation. In particular, developers have made progress in reducing the amount of time it takes to get the project permitting started, which we are showing in phase 1, which is the gray area shown at the bottom of each bar. We think this represents success in our funding program, offering better incentives for project readiness, as well as developers gaining experience and know-how and how to deliver these stations. Next slide, please. The joint report also builds on the analysis done by the Air Resources Board in the summer annual evaluation report. As I mentioned, in 2018, the Air Resources Board made a new projection based on auto manufacturers survey and how many FCEVs might be in California by 2024. We take this number and look at the regional distribution of this projection and compare it to the capacity of the stations funded so far by our funding program. We actually look at 80% of the funded capacity because we don't want to assume that stations will be dispensing their full capacity every day. So we compare this funded capacity to the estimated capacity we will need in each region by 2024, and we see how much more capacity we think we will need by then. So we do this to give ourselves and our stakeholders an idea of the regional need for stations. And this is just one piece of information along with other analyses done by auto manufacturers and station developers to identify station locations that they think will best serve customer demand. Next slide, please. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Andrew Martinez with the Air Resources Board to talk about this project, the self-sufficiency evaluation that we discussed in the joint report. The Air Resources Board is really leading this project, so I'm going to turn it over to him to give you more details than I can provide. Andrew?
Thank you, Jane. So Assembly Bill 8 is, much of the work for Assembly Bill 8 is tied to the concept and the idea of 100 hydrogen fueling stations to be funded and to be analyzed and reported on by both of the agencies. And that number is really associated with, what is required to help get hydrogen fuel cell vehicles into the market and to be able to launch the actual retail market for hydrogen fueling stations, but also be able to launch an actual a retail consumer market for the vehicles as well. And so that goal is, is a large focus of the Joint Agency Staff Report every December. However, AB 8 also makes reference to the need to understand what are the requirements of getting a hydrogen fueling station network to the point of self-sufficiency, essentially to the point where further investment and continued growth of the station network would not require additional state funding to keep it in operation. And so we have begun taking a look at how to assess this and how to perform this analysis. I believe in the last two, in the 2016 and 2017 annual Joint Agency Staff Reports, we actually reported on how we were developing this analysis, beginning with a framework for how we would actually search for data, how we would gather data, how we would look at the data, what would be our metrics for determining how to assess what does self-sufficiency mean, and perform some sort of quantitative evaluation. So we completed the first phase of that, and we reported on it in the Joint Agency Staff Report for 2018. And that first phase involved surveying and interviews with many stakeholders within the hydrogen fueling industry. That included stakeholders such as industrial gas companies, station operators, equipment manufacturers, et cetera. And we essentially were asking them to provide to the two agencies their view of what is required of a self-sufficient network at both the network level, at the policy level, and at the individual station level. What are some of those metrics that define a self-sufficient station? And so this graphic is showing a summary of some of the most readily available information we got from the survey, most quantitative information that we'll be able to leverage in our analysis. And I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. There's quite a lot of discussion in the report about these. But one of the key takeaways that we found from this was that essentially much of this information was not necessarily a surprise. We had previously had an understanding that, for example, stations around 400 kilograms per day are sort of a minimum required for it to be financially self-reliant. But the important thing was that we went through the process, the methodology, and this is one of the first times, if not the first time, that we have this kind of information methodologically collected and that we can reference going forward to be able to perform these analyses. So our next steps are to take this information and be able to build scenario analysis or build some other kind of quantitative analysis capability to look at what will it really take to get a self-sufficient network, and such that the continued operation will not rely on state funding any further. So we definitely encourage anybody interested to take a look at the chapter, and there's an appendix that breaks down some of this information by different types of groups within the industry. The chapter within the main body of the report is a summary of all the groups together. And so, Jane?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And the next slide, please, which is our final slide. So just to provide a little summary of the report, through the end of 2018, the Energy Commission has allocated about $120 million towards hydrogen refueling stations. And that's the 64 stations that are funded and that we showed on the map, 39 of which are open today. We conclude that public funding remains necessary to establish 100 stations in California, as well as the newer goal we have of reaching 200 stations by 2025 and the 1,000 stations by 2030, as Keith showed on his timeline, or no, number line earlier. In the joint report, we discussed the hydrogen draft solicitation concepts, which were released in January of 2019. And these are the concepts lead to our next solicitation. The joint report will, in the joint report, we discuss how we hope these concepts will further contribute to developing stations at a faster pace and at lower cost. And they build on ideas we've heard from stakeholders over the last year or so. You can find the draft solicitation concepts at this link, as you're welcome to read those, and we are currently seeking feedback on them through the Energy Commission's online docket system. So we encourage you to go take a look at that. And that is the end of our presentation, and I'm going to turn it back over to the Fuelcell Partnership staff now.
Jane, before we let you go, we have one question that came in that's very pertinent to what you're talking about. When we talk about the funding, the $20 million a year for hydrogen stations, can you briefly mention how that's being allocated? Is it $20 million every year, or do you scoot that money around from year to year?
It is every year that the funding program receives an allocation from the state legislature. So in every state budget, every year there's funding provided. And so yes, it's basically been $20 million a year. There are maybe some little tweaks to that in certain years, but that is basically it. Now, when that funding is distributed varies on sort of where we are in our processes, but yes, it pretty much has stuck to that, the $20 million per year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jane. All right, I think we have Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. This is Dave Park with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. I assist with the industry with the development of hydrogen refueling infrastructure. And jumping off of Jane's last point, I will discuss the CEC draft solicitation that she mentioned, and then also my next topic will be the California Fuel Cell Partnership OEM location recommendations. So on this slide, what I'll be discussing is the California Energy Commission draft solicitation concepts for light-duty hydrogen refueling infrastructure. I'll talk about the draft solicitation at a very high level, but I want just to start off by noting the industry's appreciation for CEC visioning and their response to industry feedback as represented in this draft solicitation. This is a draft document. It is meant to garner feedback from stakeholders so that CEC can fine-tune the actual grant offering, and there's been no indication of when that offering will be made. But some of the highlights of this draft solicitation is CEC is moving to a multi-year process for funding the development of hydrogen refueling infrastructure with funding released on an annual basis. And this multi-year approach is a beneficial departure from past solicitations in that it helps industry plan out the development of the necessary infrastructure to meet the market demands. So what is offered, or what's identified in this draft solicitation, is up to $22.6 million in grant funds offered annually for the development of stations, and there's a proposed $110 million total investment by the state into this sector. There's no indication of where those funds will be coming from, although it does identify where past funds have originated. One of the major highlights of this solicitation that differs from previous GFOs is this concept of tranches and batches of stations. And the way we interpret this concept is CEC is suggesting that applicants submit in their application a tranche of stations to be implemented in annual batches. So, and those batches would be funded annually. So the tranche is the larger set of, or the total developmental project, multi-year developmental project, and the batch would be the annual development goals of the applicant. What this indicates is it's a mechanism for meeting the 200 station goal by 2025. And as I mentioned earlier, it does provide industry that long-term planning opportunity. The map shown comes from our Revolution document, the California Fuel Cell Partnership Revolution document, and the colored areas on the map are indicative of the geographic areas where these funded projects would be located. In closing, I'd just like to reiterate, this is a draft solicitation concept, and CEC is in the feedback stage, and they are accepting feedback on this document. Ben, next slide, please. And so that leads us into the next topic, which is the California Fuel Cell Partnership periodically provides a list developed jointly by our OEM partners, which is a subset of our total membership. And it's a letter of recommendation that identifies locations where the OEMs see market opportunities for selling fuel cell vehicles, and where hydrogen stations would, where the market demand would likely be most prominent. So the last time this letter was published was in 2017, and we just published the 2019 version of this letter this past Monday. The letter can be found on the California Fuel Cell Partnership homepage and also on our resources page. In total, the OEMs are recommending 114 locations. They are identified in two groups, Group 1 and Group 2, and I'll get into the details of those groups in a little bit. But the focus of the recommendations is to provide greater station density and expanded network coverage. And so expanded network coverage, meaning coverage in existing markets, Sacramento, Greater San Francisco, and then Los Angeles, Orange County, and the Inland Empire. Then also, the OEMs would like to enable the San Diego market and provide initial and more density to the San Diego market to meet future vehicle demand in that market. And then in terms of network coverage, they suggest that the Central Valley, the Central Coast, well, the Central Valley and Central Coast would both be good connector locations, but also seed markets within those geographic areas as well. The last letter identified a Las Vegas connector, so a Los Angeles-Las Vegas connector station. And the OEM suggests that that station, maybe in the Barstow, Victorville area, would be ideal if developed in conjunction with a location in Las Vegas as well, so that there could be a connection between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. In the letter, you'll notice that there are two groups, Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1 is a list of 56 locations, and many of these are in the previous 2017 recommendations, but have not yet been funded. And the OEMs are in generally universal agreement that these locations should and must be developed without priority. They're all equally have equal priority. And then they suggest an additional 58 locations in Group 2 to provide additional expansion and interconnection. And those Group 2 locations have been binned into 3 priority bins, but the OEMs that participated in this exercise agree that the time to develop is and can be a factor, and therefore if, for instance, a Group 2 location is identified as being able to be developed more quickly than a Group 1, there's no reason why there should be a delay in funding that location. So this letter is addressed to the hydrogen development community and stakeholders, and it should help to address questions of where stations might go next. And with that, I'll pass this back to Ben. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. All right, Keith, you're up.
So as always, we've wanted to, over the last year or so, increase the discussion of other vehicle categories. And as you've seen in previous webinars, we've talked about trucks. And this one, I wanted to kind of take a little more focus on buses here in California. As I indicated at the beginning of the webinar, with our fuel cell bus census, we have now 30 buses in revenue service. I think the last time we presented, it was about 25 buses. So good indicators that we're beginning to expand that bus fleet across the state. One of the things we did for the first time was ask each agency, what's your accumulated miles in terms of service? And in California, we now have over 4 million miles of service from 3 bus agencies, as well as UC Irvine, which operates a fuel cell bus. I am going to be posting on our website, and I will include it in this information when we send it out late next week or the week after. I'm going to include a presentation I recently did about fuel cell buses in California that looks at each agency and looks at some key indicators, some key activities and achievements they've made over the last couple of years. And I think you'll be really surprised to see kind of the level of commitment we have here in California. Even though it's 3 agencies, all of these agencies are unique for any number of reasons. For example, Sunline Transit, they were the first transit agency in the US to go all natural gas back in 1994. They swapped out their entire fleet in one day. And they've actually been a pioneer with zero emission vehicles, whether it's fuel cell or battery electric, for quite some time. And in fact, they actually have a board policy that has remained intact since about 1993 that directs staff to really kind of push the envelope on zero emission technology and look for ways to incorporate that more and more. And you'll see from Sunline, even though it's one of the smaller agencies, they're very aggressive. They have opened up a West Coast center of excellence to help train and educate other transit agencies and other stakeholders on the technology. You've got, for example, AC Transit out of the East Bay. They have trained, for example, all of their technicians to work on fuel cell buses. So they don't isolate this technology. Whatever bus is ready to go is the next bus that goes out. And so that's a really great endorsement of the technology and what it's capable of. Right now, I believe, as I recall, they have 13 buses. They've got another 11 buses on order. We should be seeing most of them coming this year. The newest kind of member of the fuel cell bus family is Orange County Transportation Authority, or OCTA. Right now, they have 1 bus. They are expecting another 10 buses this year, and they're building a station to accommodate all those buses. Really interesting indicator about their new station that's being built. The developer is a company called Trillium. Up until about 1.5 to 2 years ago, it was known as Trillium CNG, and reflecting the fact that they are now beginning to build hydrogen infrastructure as well as charging infrastructure. It's a really strong indicator of other companies that are now beginning to look at hydrogen fueling infrastructure and fuel cell electric vehicles in a way that they weren't several years ago. So lots of little indicators, and those are just a few kind of items that are in this presentation that we're going to put on the resources page. Hopefully it'll be up before the end of the day. So next slide, please. And so, as most of you know, it's not just about California anymore when it comes to launching the passenger vehicle market and more for fuel cell electric vehicles. In the past, as you know, we've talked about the Northeast. Since the last quarterly webinar, one of their stations, they've opened it up. They are beginning to fuel, but it's fueling by appointment only because they really haven't, automakers haven't begun to release a lot of vehicles yet. They're waiting for more stations to be built. There are a few stakeholders that are driving in the Massachusetts area, and so they're able to use one of those stations. They've got a 5th station in the commission phase. One of the issues that the next obstacle they've got to deal with is they're awaiting approval from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation regarding permission to drive through tunnels. While that may sound, it's an issue that they're waiting to be resolved. I think it's going to result in a positive decision by Massachusetts, and that approval will trigger the ability for them to build more stations, as well as it will hopefully trigger New York and New Jersey stakeholders to approve tunnels, as driving through tunnels as well. So we're really looking forward to that. I was in Boston last week. We met with staff members of various state agencies. Education has been ongoing in the Northeast. It's been led by a variety of stakeholders, including the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development here in California, reaching out to whether it's state officials or folks in NGOs, and really beginning to give them an understanding of the technology, of what's possible, of why we need fuel cell electric vehicles. You know, to back up a moment, to really make clear that in order to get to that zero emission future, you need both technologies. And so these are some of the, I call them the quiet efforts going on, the quiet conversations that are taking place, not just in the Northeast, but beyond. Next slide, please. So those, yes, Chris?
Before you jump off that, you said there's one station that's open. Which one of those Northeast stations is the one that's open?
At this point, I don't recall. And at this point, because they're only doing fueling by appointment, I just thought it was best not to actually know it.
Okay. And Air Liquide is building more stations than this. It's just that these are the ones that are sitting there built, right?
Right. The goal is to get to, as you can see on the slide, a network of at least 12 stations, and they're working in collaboration with Toyota.
Okay, thank you.
So similar quiet conversations are beginning to take place in the Pacific Northwest. I'll talk a minute about the Vancouver area, but we're beginning to see some activity legislatively with the Oregon and Washington state legislatures. I've included an example of one of the bills, Washington State Senate Bill 5588, that authorizes public utilities to produce, distribute, and sell renewable hydrogen. So that's a really good sign. There are at least 2 other bills that are hydrogen related. If someone really wants to know what those are, you're welcome to contact me by email, and I'll be happy to get those to you. We're now kind of beginning to have more and more conversations with the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance based out of the Pacific Northwest. They just formed over a year ago. They've been growing really quickly. One of their newest members is Toyota, among other, and several utilities. So really good signs that there's an interest in taking a lot of the grid in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of which is renewable, and looking at the opportunities for hydrogen. And really, so looking at those opportunities, they are hosting, RHA is hosting a symposium on May 20th. I'll be there as well. And the work that's being done up there and the interest in the grid is also reflected. I think in one of the previous webinars, we talked about the fact that British Columbia has a study where they are looking at the possibility of using their mostly renewable grid to create renewable hydrogen and using it as an export to California and Japan for fuel and other uses. And like I said, in the British Columbia area, in Vancouver specifically, they're developing a total of 6 hydrogen fueling stations in partnership with Shell and Esso Exxon. Next slide, please. So this is the slide that our colleague and I have now overlaid where it says opening, overlaid new updated information about where those stations are. So one station is already open. One is expected to open in the second quarter of this year, 2 more in the fourth quarter of this year, and another 2 in 2020. And this Pacific Northwest kind of beyond the Pacific Northwest, I should say, in Utah, for example, we're beginning to have conversations with them as well. The state of Utah has hosted 2 hydrogen conferences over the last 2 years, and stakeholders from California have ventured there and begun some really substantive conversations with stakeholders there. So there's a lot of interesting stuff percolating all over the country. I haven't included a slide for Hawaii. There's no update at this time. We know last time there's a new station that's opened up there. I'm hoping we'll have more to share with you at the next quarterly webinar. So if we could have the next slide, please. And so this is kind of in closing, kind of a summary of some of the things that are going on here in California and beyond. Ben, I'd like to turn it back over to you. I think now the time we're going to look at responding to questions that many of you have given us over the course of the webinar or prior to the webinar.
Thanks, Keith. And so Chris Whiteshield will be moderating the Q&A. Chris, do we have any questions coming in?
We do have lots of questions coming in, and for some of you, I've been answering your questions as we've gone through. Every question that we get, those submitted before the webinar, during the webinar, the ones I've answered privately, we will put them all in one great big Q&A and post it on our website. Some of the questions, we want to make sure we give you accurate information, in-depth information, links to more information, because some of them are not really straightforward answers. So I want to hit a couple of them that are really simple answers. Then the first one is for you, and it's about the status on sauce. How real time is it? Should people wait a couple of minutes? How often do the stations update?
Yeah, so we do have some stations that are reporting in real time. However, we do have a handful of stations that are still reporting in 10-minute increments. And so definitely check that information icon to make sure that, if there's any other information or if there's any delay, again, it could take up to about 10 minutes for it to update.
David, you mentioned when you were talking about the current stations and the upcoming stations, I think you used the word initiation markets and destination markets. We used to call them clusters. Can you mention how those initiation markets were determined?
We went through a blind process. We gathered the partner, gathered the OEMs. Not all of our partner OEMs participated, but the OEMs listed their priorities, their developmental priorities in terms of where their market data shows interest in fuel cell vehicles, and they submitted those lists to the partnership, and the partnership compiled those lists in a blind process. And then there was a little bit of coordination with the OEMs in terms of mapping those locations and agreement that that these are the priority locations that all the OEMs could agree on, and that this resulted from those discussions. As this process was going on, the Energy Commission released the draft GFO concepts that I discussed earlier, and it was indicated that given the amount of funding CEC is contemplating, we should expand that list to meet both the market needs and the potential for public funding of these projects. And so we added the Group 2 locations at that time, and that was very beneficial in that it both expanded existing markets and then provided additional connectors.
All right, and in our written answer too, we have a great white paper that is on our website that's about how we came up with that concept, and I'll make sure that we link to that white paper as well. Andrew, are you still on the phone with us?
Yes.
You showed that great slide showing how you're starting to look at the sustainability of hydrogen, and the intention, I know, having been here for almost since the beginning, has always been to make sure that this is one day a sustainable business that does not require government funding. So do you, even though you've just started on this process, do you have any idea of when we could start seeing sustainability or return on investment for hydrogen stations?
At this point, we don't have our analysis completed. Probably the current station operators themselves are probably right now the best source of information in terms of the financials that are going on at the stations that they are operating. But we're looking forward to being able to provide some assessment of getting to a self-sufficient station. Unfortunately, right now I don't have that information yet.
Okay, I thought you might be able to just pull that off the top of your head.
No, not yet.
And last question, because we are out of time here. Again, we're going to answer everything in writing, including all of the questions asking about the status of particular stations and when they're going to open and how they get caught up in the planning process. We talked quite a bit about needing more stations, but not quite as much about continued hydrogen production. Jane, I don't know if you're still with us, but other than the 3 production facilities that you mentioned, Air Liquide and the 2 that you funded, is there any idea of how much more production we may need in the state of California?
There is a lot of work going on to figure that out right now. There have been a couple other announcements. I believe Air Products also made an announcement for more production recently. But actually, the activities around the California Fuel Cell Revolution, the 2030 vision that the Fuel Cell Partnership is coordinating, there is one follow-on activity related to that very question of hydrogen production. How much do we need? When do we need it? And so that's definitely something that everyone's working on. And I don't have any numbers on the top of my head, but that is definitely an important subject that folks are thinking about now.
Okay, we'll definitely do some follow-up on that. We always get a lot of questions asking about a particular station, and it's the station near you, and why it looks like it's just sitting in a planning process for a long time. Depending upon the city, and even depending upon the location within the city, the process of filing your building permit to having it actually approved by the planning department could be as short as a couple of months. It could be as long as a few years. I will tell you, as the former owner of a business, that when we tried to do a remodel, it took us 18 months to get our building permit. There are many different checkoffs and reviews to go through, and it also depends upon the load, the workload of that particular planning department or a particular engineer who might look at a certain type of data. I wish we could tell you this is exactly where each station is in the planning process, but we don't have that ability either. The best thing I can tell you to do is every city has an online tool that you can track applications for any type of construction yourself. You can put in a permit number if you know it, or you can put in an address and it will show you where it is. Unfortunately, many of those just say exactly what we say, permit in progress or permit issued. So I know that some of you ask us about particular stations and we try to give you the information that we have. And I know that's not the best answer or the answer you're looking for, but we will do our very best to update everything that we hear as we hear it. So we do know that in most of these cities where they have had one station go in, their second one takes half the time, their third one takes a third of the time. They just need to get a little practice going. So, and thank heavens for Gia and Tyson at GoBiz. They have been very, very helpful, as is the Energy Commission, in meeting with people. As you saw on Jane's chart, they've already gone down from 4 years to 2, and we hope to get that even faster. So we will be following up with everybody on an email. All of the answers will be written out with links and details where we have them, and you can look for that early next week, and we'll be emailing everybody with the link to the blog where the Q&A is, the webinar recordings posted, and the slides are posted.
Thank you. And again, I just want to thank Jane, Berner, as well as Andrew Martinez for joining us in today's webinar. Also, we will be sending you an email with asking for feedback. I know in the past we've tried to keep things pretty high level, and we've heard that you want more information. Please let us know if this is the right amount of information that we're providing for you. And so again, thank you for joining us in today's webinar, and we will have these posted shortly.